Hey guys, it's Valkrin. This video today is titled How to Finish Games and Stop Throws, and I really wanted to make this video because I feel like there's not a whole lot of content on this subject. Finishing the game is very important because, even if you have that lead going into the mid game, unless you kill the Nexus or unless they surrender, you have not gotten those league points. You have not moved up the division unless that game has won in your favor. So this is going to be a very important video if you're having difficulties in these areas. Four main topics I'm going to discuss, and I'm going to break down into each different section. Really important to understand that there is a fine difference in every aspect of what you're going to be doing. Now, first up, let's talk about risky duels and why they happen and why they're so terrible for the winning team. If you're trading 1-for-1 in a duel and you're a winning team and you're ahead, you're higher level, and you have got shutdown gold, it's almost always going to benefit the losing team, that losing player that you traded 1-for-1 for. Because, like I said, you're giving shutdown gold, you're giving bonus gold in experience, bonus experience if you're a higher level champion dying to a lower level champion. And I'll go into that in the next slide. And 1-for-1 trades prolong the game. Most players don't want to push when one of your teammates is dead, and oftentimes it just overall makes the game last longer. And for a losing team, that's a good thing, because the longer the game lasts, the more chances they have to come back. And once full builds have come about, it doesn't matter if you've had a massive lead the entire game. Once you hit full build, it's like, oh well, we're at full capacity. Okay, so talking about how champion kill XP works. Look at the underlined portion on the screen. The experience gained is equal to this 75% of the total experience required for a champion to go from the slain champion's current level to the next level up. So if you're a higher level champion and you die to a lower level champion, that lower level champion is going to get a ton of experience, because the experience ward is increased if there's a positive level difference between champions and decreased if there's a negative. So in that 1-for-1 trade, if you're the higher level, you're going to get less experience out of it. And that champion that died but may have gotten experience for the kill is going to get a whole lot out of that. So you have to realize that 1-for-1 trade is not worth because you typed it in all caps in alt chat. It's just not. Okay, next part. Organizing, harnessing the chaos of solo queue. Now this is important because solo queue is incredibly chaotic, so you have to make the best of every situation. Your teammates cannot understand everything you're about to do. They cannot read your mind. You need to communicate when you're engaging, especially when you're ahead. Before you use that ability to go in, look at your minimap, see where your teammates are, make sure it's going to be a good engage, because if you have that lead, the game is in your hands. The game is in your hands to you have it. You can throw it away, or you can hold on to it and be patient and take a free win. If no one in your team is making calls, then you need to do it. This is very important because timing buffs, objectives, and just overall making general calls of like, hey, let's go push down this lane. That's the general guidelines of kind of what holds back the chaos of your teammates making ridiculously crazy plays because they don't know what to do. And that's not necessarily true. They might know what to do, but if nothing is generally happening and you have a lead, it's in human nature just to have fun, and they think the game is already won, and you should never plan like the game is already won. You should never play like that. When you have a lead like that, you need to be even more patient than you would if you were, even with the enemy team. And lastly, you need to expect the plays to be sloppy, and this is something that a lot of players haven't really got the grasp of yet. Regardless of whatever bracket you're in, your teammates are going to make mistakes. And Diamond and Challenger and Bronze, Silver, everyone's going to make mistakes. Now, some of the mistakes might be more consistent and constant in lower brackets, but those mistakes are still going to be there sometimes in higher level of play. People are going to accidentally hit flash on accident. Whoops, I flashed into their team. It's going to happen sometimes. You have to adapt to it. You just have to expect it to happen sometimes. The enemy team's going to do it sometimes, and just make the best of what happens. Okay, so step one in finishing games. Now this might be obvious, but when you have an advantage, you need to use that advantage to get more advantages, right? So when you get kills and you have a lead, you should have an opportunity to get more towers, barons, and dragons in the other team. Because while you're dead, you can't make anything happen. So if you kill one of their teammates or someone on the enemy team, that's someone who can't effectively stop you from taking an objective. And all objectives should directly lead to you eventually killing that nexus. The solo queue objective value system, absolutely very important to understand. Early game. Dragons and outer turrets. Those are basically all you can do at that early portion of the game. Inner turrets would be a little bit too optimistic to think about, but you really need to start considering like the value of a dragon early game. And early game, in my mind, is 0 to 13 minutes, and then that's about, sometimes it extends longer and it could be shorter. It's kind of an objective thought. So an outer tower is about the same as a dragon, right? But if you get that early dragon, you're generating gold that isn't necessarily going to be there all the time. Those outer turrets and those inner turrets, they're always going to be there for you to take. But that dragon's only going to be there every so often. So the team that gets dragon ultimately has that early advantage in the early game because they can always go get that outer turret. But if you can't contest that dragon, then you need to make sure you're making something happen elsewhere, like take that top turret or mid turret or something, or at least pressuring somewhere to create or attempt to create an equivalent objective while they're taking that. Mid game, the important thing to note is around mid game, I would say Baron is sometimes better than Inhibitor and vice versa. And it really comes down to what you can use with the Baron buff or what you can do after taking their Inhibitor down. But mid game, they're about the same. And the variety comes into sometimes certain champions have more benefits from Baron buff than others, i.e. Jax, champions that get damage from both stats. And also Baron buff significantly helps you siege, so getting that mid-game Baron can sometimes lead to getting an inhibitor of your own, even if you lose your own inhibitor. So it can go either way, but it's important to note that, if the enemy team is gonna get an uncontested Baron, you might be able to get that inhibitor if you're already out of position, bottom lane or something like that. It can sometimes happen. Now late game, more than likely I would say inhibitors are worth more than Barons, simply because of the fact that you're working directly towards ending that game. Baron buff, it does scale, but later into the game it becomes less significant. Inhibitors and tower pressure and lane pressure becomes a much bigger thought at that point in the game. Okay, so these three questions should be the ones that you ask yourself in determining if you should group in Sieges 5, split push, or do Baron. And these are the three ways you can end a game or ultimately take such an advantage that it should lead to you winning the game. And, there are going to be situations that are going to be out of your control. Like, your teammates are going to make critical errors sometimes that will lead to games that you just couldn't win. But you should always work towards trying to win these games. So these three questions we should talk about and focus on right now. Can you outpoke them? Can you safely dive them? Do they have massive wave clear? And these three questions are centered around sieging S5, but it's still really important to determine to figure out if you need to split push or do bait or do Baron. So can you outpoke them? Now, poking them under a tower is very important because if you can't all-out dive them, then you need to soften them up, because if they're lower in HP, it makes dives easier, and quite frankly, most of the time if you poke someone down, they're probably going to go back and heal, which will give you, a time frame to get more damage down in the tower. If you can't outpoke them and you can't safely dive them, chances are grouping and sieging S5 is not going to be beneficial for your team. If you can outpoke them, but they've got massive wave clear and crowd control, then it can be a coin toss. Sometimes your teammates will land those nice niddly spears and stuff, and then things might go really badly when someone tries to dive. Sometimes you just have to take away the equation of things going really badly for your teammates. If you simply cannot dive and kill them or make a whole lot of leeway on their tower, then you don't need to group in Siege S5, and you need to choose the alternative of either split pushing or baiting Baron. I'm going to go into that. And first, we're going to talk about baiting or doing Baron. Now, how do you correctly do Baron? And this is like a kind of a three-step thing leading up to figuring out if you need to bait or do Baron. Okay, so step one, you need to figure out where the enemy team is. If you've taken, if you're ahead and you've taken the outer turrets, then the map has kind of opened up in your favor. And a lot of high elo players and a lot of professional players kind of have this Baron button in their head. And if you watch their stream, sometimes you'll just immediately see them be like, oh, we got to do Baron, we got to do Baron. And it's kind of like this light switch that goes off in their head whenever they see something on the minimap. And it really comes down to where the enemy positioning is. If you see their jungler bottom lane, that's like, whew, that's free Baron for us because we're around the Baron pit. And usually they can't get the Baron in time and stuff like that. But it really comes down to just the enemy team not being where they should be while you have a certain control of certain objectives. Step 2, you need to make sure you have vision control of the Baron pit. This includes the surrounding jungle. It's very important that you have denied vision of Baron directly, but also very important that you have vision of the areas leading up to Baron from the enemy base, so you can see where they're coming in, where they are exactly, and what you can make use of that from. Step 3, after you've denied their vision, you need to come up with kind of an arbitrary system where you deny their vision and you've got your wards up, and you wait a certain amount of time, usually 5 to 15 seconds, and just see what the enemy team does. You don't have to directly start Baron as soon as you deny their vision, because in my mind, and what I think a lot of the other players consider in high elo, baiting Baron can be more effective than actually doing Baron, and it's actually much safer, and it doesn't cost you anything to bait Baron other than the words and what you've used to deny their vision. And you can just make them walk up and suicide if you do it correctly. So let's talk about baiting Baron. What are the ideal ingredients to bait Baron? Well, obviously you need vision denying and vision of your own. 1 to 2 Oracle lenses is pretty much ideal. Oftentimes you only have one, and it's pretty nice because you just kind of need to have general sweeping of an area. And vision wards can be pretty nice, but they're static and you can't always get all their wards out. Having one on the Baron pit and then a vision ward maybe behind the Baron to clear out all their wards leading up to Baron can be very beneficial for your team. And then have generally about 3 to 5 sight wards in the surrounding areas to see where the enemy team is moving in after you denied their vision, and that's your cue to pick them off if they're out of position and not directly grouped up. And lastly, you absolutely need willing teammates, because if your teammates aren't on the same page as you, things are going to go bad really fast. And lastly, the quote on this thing is, it's all about perception, and that's basically what baiting Baron is all about. If you make the enemy team think you're doing Baron, they're going to do some stupid stuff to try and get vision of Baron, and that's your cue to get free kills and then directly after get a Baron. Okay, so we talked about baiting Baron. Oh, we don't want to talk about that yet. Okay. How to correctly do Baron. Is the enemy jungler still alive? And we'll go into the yes or no scenario after that. But the most important thing when you're actually going to do Baron is you need to have DPSers and you need to have zoners. And supports and AP mids will generally be the best at zoning because they have abilities that are either long ranged or they have lockdown CC. They have ways of creating presence and a threat in a large area. Nidalee javelins, Ziggs bombs, a Morgana support. You have ways of throwing stuff out and making people sad if they walk into them. One of the most important things you have to consider when doing Baron is just because their smiter isn't alive means you're going to get Baron. There are abilities that can do more damage than smite, and I didn't put anything on the right of this, but there are a lot of abilities. Cho'Gath Feast, Gragas Ultimate with enough AP can do more damage than smite. A lot of abilities might not do as much damage as smite, but do close to it, so bad things can happen. And you shouldn't get mad at your jungler for not laning smite if you let the enemy team just sit behind Baron while you're doing it. That's where zoning comes in. If they're sitting behind Baron, then you need to stop hitting Baron, and you need to make sure they're not in range to use their abilities if you can help it. Okay, so is their jungler still alive? Will the jungler be in range to steal Baron before it's dead? Yes. Stop damaging Baron and eliminate that threat of their jungler. And that's very important. You shouldn't finish Baron while their jungler is just sitting behind Baron waiting for you to get it low enough to attempt to steal it, because a smite is honestly 50-50. It's very difficult to consistently outsmite someone unless you practice it a whole lot, and the enemy just doesn't practice it at all. If the enemy jungler isn't nearby, then you need to finish it as long as there are other threats that aren't close enough to steal it. And if there are, then treat it like their jungler is nearby it. Okay, so their jungler is dead. The main focus should be on finishing Baron, but like I said, you need to kill those that try and stop you or try to steal it. And you don't necessarily have to kill them, but you just have to make sure they're not in range to use their abilities if you can help it. And this is where going back into this goes back into zoners and having Baron DPSers. Champions that are best at just sitting there and auto-attacking like Vayne are more than likely should be just hitting Baron rather than zoning. And champions like Annie, Nidalee, Ziggs, while they might do a whole lot of damage to Baron, their presence as a zoner makes doing Baron much safer for your team as a whole. So ultimately, if you can zone and your team already has a lot of Baron DPS, you should be zoning. Okay, and lastly, let's talk about split pushing. Now, this is the most ridiculous one because when one lane has pressure to it, they need to back off and the other lane needs to push up. And I described it as a seesaw because in my mind, that's what it's always been. You know, when one side's up, the other needs to be back because that's what usually happens. When you have a strong duelist in a side lane and you have them pressuring, and then the enemy team hasn't sent anyone to deal with that yet, chances are mid lane right now or wherever your team is most clustered is going to be at a numbers disadvantage. So they need to back off until their duelist, who's pushed out up ahead, creates enough pressure to bring one or more to him or her, you know, depending on who's playing, and then they need to back off. Or if it's a 1v1 scenario, they can beat them and create a numbers advantage for your team, and then it's a even bigger seesaw. But ultimately, split pushing is designed to reposition the enemy team. It just creates confusion for the enemy team because if your strong duelist beats someone 1v1, then they need to send someone else there, and just all chaos starts breaking loose because you're ultimately just trying to get a numbers advantage. And split pushing becomes really effective at repositioning the enemy team and really effective at breaking sieges when you directly can't win a 5v5 against the enemy team. Because you're forcing them not to be able to fight you 5-on-5 if you do it correctly. If you constantly back off when you're at a numbers disadvantage and pressure when you are, then you're just seesawing the other team. Okay, guys, thanks for watching. Go to thevalkrin.com if you want to find more content. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for even more content. And lastly, if you want to see me stream, the best times are after my videos are released. That's for sure when I stream. As soon as I release a video, I start streaming. And if you want to keep up to date with everything that I'm doing, follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And I'll talk to you guys later.